Welcome into the Inquirer podcast. It is Jeremy Werner, and welcome in to our special show here, Selection Sunday show. And we got a good one for you today. Derek Piper's still a little bit under the weather, so we'll get his analysis later on in the week as he starts to feel better. But we have booked our Airbnb. We have our credentials in for the NCAA tournament. As Illinois men draw a number 6 seed in the NCAA tournament, they will play in the Midwest Regional in Milwaukee. Nice get for them. And if they advance to the Sweet 16, it'd be in Indianapolis. Pretty good draw for Illini fans if Illinois could win a few games here. And they get the winner of the play-in game, the 11 seeds, Texas and Xavier, two teams that barely made it in the tournament. So Illinois will play them, one of them, at 8:45 Central Time Friday in Milwaukee. And then if they win that game, they'll play the winner of number 3 seed Kentucky, number 14 seed Troy. We have a busy show for you today. Without Derek, we're going to lean on Isaac Trotter, who's going to join me in a second here. We're also going to get the fan perspective from Mike Carpenter, who rides the roller coaster as a fan. And I want to talk to him about that because this has been a wild roller coaster this season, but also just kind of zoom out and look at what Brad Underwood has done. 5 straight NCAA tournaments. I think that's tied for 8th or 9th in the country right now. And then we'll talk about the women's basketball draw as they get a number 8 seed in the NCAA tournament, a second year and second time in 3 years that Shauna Green will be in the NCAA tournament. But kind enough to join us, kind enough to give us his time, as always, is Isaac Trotter, CBS Sports college basketball writer. Isaac, happy Selection Sunday. How are you, man?
Doing well. Yeah, it was really fun getting the selection show starting. The tribute to Greg Gumbel was really cool. That was kind of like the voice of my childhood. And now we go. Now we have the 68 teams out there. Indiana does not make it in. Carolina makes it in. Just so many storylines. And selfishly, as somebody who was heading up to Milwaukee, I already had this book that I was going up to Milwaukee. I was kind of looking forward to seeing if my guys were going to come up with me. And so we're going to be reunited in Milwaukee. We're excited. It should be a great time. And I mean, here we go. This is the best time of the year.
Lakefront Brewery Wednesday night. Let's do it. We got a lot of spots to see up in there. Love that city. So let's go on a scale of 1, saying we absolutely got hosed here, which I think West Virginia is feeling, or 10, we're going to the Final Four. How do you kind of rate the Illini's draw by the NCAA tournament committee here?
Well, there's no such thing as an easy draw, but I would go with 7. You know, I think that you kind of went into this going, man, that those 2 seeds look really, really terrifying. Like based on like some of the matchups, if you kind of did some of the work, it's like, all right, I think you're probably, if you're Illinois, going to play St. John's because you probably don't want to be a 2 seed that plays Tennessee. They would try to avoid that. They probably don't want to set up an Alabama rematch. They're going to try to avoid that if possible. Michigan State, obviously the other 2 seed, you're probably going to try to avoid that. So St. John's made sense. It's like that team, their style gave Illinois a lot of problems on paper. This draw against an 11 seed like Xavier or 11 seed like Texas with a Kentucky team that's extremely beat up in the second round in Milwaukee, I mean, I think you got to take it and run. And now it's up to playing your best basketball, and we'll see how you execute and figure it out from there. But from a draw perspective, you should not be complaining if you're an Illinois fan tonight because it could be way worse.
All right, let's focus on Illinois for a second, Isaac. It's weird because you had 4 straight wins there where you're feeling pretty good about them, and then they dropped that egg against Maryland, who seems like the nightmare matchup, but then Maryland loses to Michigan, who Illinois beat by 20. So just what do you think of this Illinois team heading into the tournament?
Well, every single time you question their consistency, and if it's gone, there's questions about the consistency that continue to pop back up. And I do think that Maryland is a really hard matchup for Illinois. I did not like the body language, especially during that game. I think that there were some concerning quotes coming out of the locker room after that about like just the attention to detail or just like the fight from that group. It's like, it's March. Like there has to be some semblance of like these games matter more and they really ramp up. And you just don't want to hear some of those things out of the locker room. But at the end of the day, Maryland is a brutal matchup for them. They also kind of made that worse for themselves by not guarding the 3-point line very, very well and continually to struggle with turnovers and stuff like that. So at the bright side, I do think that if you're kind of heading into these matchups, if you play Xavier and if you play Kentucky in the next round after that, those are 2 of the more passive defenses. And I think Maryland's aggressive defense is something that's given Illinois some issues. And if you could potentially play it closer to a passive defense, I think that stylistically sets up for you. And then the 2 double bigs and Derek Queen just being, a complete flamethrower.
Yeah, I get a little bit more nervous about the first game because they're so inexperienced, right? I mean, Kylan Boswell has played 4 games in the NCAA tournament. Dre Gibbs-Allhorn is a deep reserve, basically. Rotation players played 4 games in the NCAA tournament. And then Trey White's played 1. at USC. So you got a lot of new guys playing in the NCAA tournament. And I think they just got to deal with it, but they also have to deal with it well. But let's talk about it. They have to play a team that's already played a game in the NCAA tournament, which is not a great thing, but they're playing two teams that barely got in. And according to a lot of people are surprised both these teams got in Xavier and Texas. So let's break it down. What do you think of Texas as a potential matchup for Illinois?
So Texas would be, I think, a tougher matchup than Xavier, even though I think Xavier's the better team than Texas. Texas is a very big physical team that have a lot of guards that can win one-on-one matchups. Illinois tries to force a ton of those tough twos when they're playing their drop coverage. Tremone Mark is a middle of the floor isolation hunter who can get to that shot and knock it down. Jordan Pope is a middle of the floor operation type of guy that can knock those shots down. So, Arthur Kaluma is like that big mismatch hunting four that Illinois has struggled with at times to guard this season. And then you have Trey Johnson, who Illinois wants to force tough shots. He's capable of making those. Like, he is so big and so explosive. And the step backside, step threes have been one of the best shots in basketball this year. Analytically, he's just outstanding at that shot. They're a tough team. And they can protect the rim at a really high level as well. Caden Shedrick is a big, strong, physical guy who has played for great defenses throughout his career. Like, this team, honestly, on paper, should be even better defensively than what they are. And they now that they're in the tournament, that's got to be the area that carries them, because their offense can get a lot of isolation happy. But on paper, that Texas team is very talented. I wouldn't say they're the best well coached, but they are very talented. They're old and they're extremely big at a lot of different positions. Like, they have terrific positional size.
This feels like a team that has underachieved almost as much as any, right? I mean, Indiana would be up there as well, but that's why their coach is on the hot seat, right? So what has gone wrong for Texas? I mean, you're talking about the talent. Trey Johnson's a projected top 5 pick. Caden Shedrick, we remember him playing Virginia, Illinois back in Vegas a couple of years ago, in Terrence's first year here. So why hasn't it clicked for them? Because they've lost, 9 of their last 14.
Yeah, the big reason is that this mesh offensively just has not clicked. And again, it goes back to roster construction, pairing an isolation heavy scorer like Jordan Pope with an isolation heavy scorer like Tremone Mark with an isolation heavy scorer like Arthur Kaluma with an isolation score. You know what I mean? You get the memo there. It's like, it is your turn, my turn to the max offensively. And that's really messed up their flow in half-court situations. This half-court offense has not been very good. They really kind of rely on, like, getting out in transition. I think the best version of them is getting out in transition and running. So it's layered, but I do think it starts with that offense, and just the pieces have not fit together very, very well. And part of it is also just the SEC. They played in a really tough schedule this year. Like, you're going to go up against outstanding teams night in and night out. They lost a lot of close games. That also is part of the thing there. And I just think it has kind of gone back to, like, this chemistry experiment that Rodney Terry bet on, of just adding talent hasn't worked. Because if you're just going to throw a bunch of roster, like, they don't have a lot of guys that want to be role players on this team. And, like, that's, like, the problem, where it feels like you see some frustrations start to mount. But again, if you get into a one-on-one, like, talented matchup, a talent versus talent type of deal, like, they're a really talented team. Like, they got like legit dudes. Like, Arthur Kaluma was a big name in the portal for a reason. Trey Johnson was a big name in the portal for a reason. Tremone Mark was a top 30 transfer in the country for a reason. So, like, talent-wise, they can go pound for pound with Illinois, no question about it.
All right, Xavier, very different team, it looks like. But what do you think of Xavier as a matchup for Illinois?
Yeah, so since February 1st, Xavier has actually been the best team in the Big East. So, like, they have been rolling a little bit lately. But they're, like I said a little bit earlier, they're a little bit more of a finesse group defensively. They play a small big man at center, Zach Fremantle, who is an outstanding offensive player. But he's kind of like a roamer. He doesn't necessarily he's not a huge rim protector. Teams this year, I pulled up the stat. Against Xavier, teams this year are shooting 65% at the rim when Fremantle's off the floor. So it's like, it can be a layup line when he's not on the floor. This defense has not been awesome this year. They're okay. And it kind of goes back to their personnel, where this is another team that has put a lot of mid-major recruits together. And I think some questions about them is like, are we too mid-major-y? Like, do we have too much mid-major talent? And I think that's kind of come back there. It's like they've had some issues with injuries as well. This is not the roster that they envisioned when they put it together, but since February 1st, they've been balling, and they can go. Like, they can really go. Ryan Conwell is one of the best shooters in the country, bar none, probably one of the top 5 snipers. And then you add in like Dante Maddox coming off the bench, and Maddox is shooting, I had the number right in front of me. Here it is. 40% from three off the bench, like that, off the bench, like that they can really get it going from three. But they're, again, like I said, they're a little bit more finesse. They're not quite as athletically imposing as Texas, but I do think that they're well coached and their pieces fit together a little bit better.
So if you're an Illinois fan, you'd say I'd rather play the well coached but less talented team in Xavier than the maybe poorly coached, poorly constructed, but pretty talented Texas team.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And I don't know if I feel good about it, but that's the analysis that I've kind of come to play with. Because I feel like against Texas, when we've seen Texas get beat, you have to beat them with threes. And we've seen that's obviously been a huge talking point with Illinois all year long. Whereas with Xavier, I do think that some of what they do is like using Tommy as a secondary playmaker to pull Fremantle away from the rim could potentially work to get more shots at the rim. I think Xavier would be a team that you can get after on the offensive glass a little bit better. Now, granted, the numbers don't say that, but just with Illinois' size and physicality at multiple different positions, I do think that like the recipe to score against Xavier might be a little bit more like translatable than the recipe to score against Texas. And so if you're going to make this like a tough shot making contest, I think Texas is be more well equipped to make some of those compared to Xavier, where they're more based off of flow and read, react. And a lot of what Xavier does, Illinois is guarded pretty well at times this year. Like they do a great job taking away threes for the most part, not Maryland though.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, the profile you're talking about, a team that likes to shoot finesse, not as physically imposing. That sounds like what Illinois succeeded against compared to the physicality and pure talent of a team like Texas. All right, if they do get through this game, and listen, we know you can't count your chickens before they hatch with this Illinois team, but if they get through that first round and have a Sunday evening would be like game against Kentucky, who is going to travel extremely well, what do you think of a potential matchup with Mark Pope's first team?
I'll be honest, I would not overlook Troy. I've watched Troy a few times this year. They got some NBA talents on that roster as well. That's a very, very good team. So we'll see what happens there. Remember Mark Pope, Illinois and Mark Pope were in the same quadrant last year, and we were looking forward to that second round matchup, and it didn't happen because they got upset. So just putting that out there. Anyway, to Kentucky, I love this group. I really like this group, but they just leave me wanting a little bit more sometimes. And it goes back to the injuries. Jackson Robinson is out. That was the guy that they thought was going to be their best player this year. He's out and not expected to be back. Lamont Butler is going to be back, but his shoulder is extremely banged up. Like he's going to play through it and grit through it, but he's not been the same player since he got banged up with that shoulder. He's missed multiple times with it. And that's a concern. But granted, this offense is terrific. They're one of the best dribble handoff scoring offenses in college basketball. Amari Williams at center from Drexel, 5-out center who can really pass. Otega Owe, one of my favorite guys in the transfer portal. Target. I loved him. He has turned into a flat-out superstar at Oklahoma. Big and strong, gets to the rim at will, very physical. And, defensively, everybody's going to say Kentucky's defense isn't very good, but they have the personnel to be good defensively. And I think we started to see that a little bit lately. They just have had so many injuries that it's been hard for them to get there. And they've had to been forced to play a lot of freshmen. And, sometimes the freshmen don't look like they're quite up to snuff, like the Colin Chandlers, the Travis Perrys of the world. So it's a group that they're beat up. But again, it's another closer to a finesse team, not as much of a physical team. And I think that's the archetype of team that Illinois matches up a little bit better against.
All right. Again, not looking too far ahead, but I got you here. Tennessee, UCLA would be the potential Sweet 16 matchup. And then what do you think of this Midwest region overall?
The Midwest region I thought was just ripe for the pickings a little bit. I think that there is some real openings here because you look at, Houston at the top of it, like that second round matchup against Gonzaga, who's a top 10 team on KenPom, like woof, because when's the last time, let's think about this. When's the last time an 8 or 9 seed was a top 10 team on KenPom?
I remember. I
think a lot of people know which answer that one was with Loyola. But yeah, like that's the type of matchup that you're potentially seeing there. And at the bottom of it, I think I've talked to a couple people already, and it's like Illinois is going to be a team that a lot of people look at as like, yeah, they can probably make it out of the bottom of that bracket to the Elite Eight if they don't like self-capitulate a little bit, you know what I mean? And just take care of their business. But yeah, Utah State, UCLA in the first round in the 7-10, that'll be a good game. I lean UCLA in that one. Tennessee, I think, will take care of business. Tennessee matches up very well against UCLA, I think. So it would not surprise me at all if Illinois and Tennessee get a rematch in the Sweet 16. Like, that's kind of my, just kind of basing out how the vibes are going with this group. An Illinois-Tennessee rematch would be something that I think both staffs would really look forward to. I think Illinois left that game feeling like they let one get away. And Tennessee, remember, Chaz Lanier barely played in the second half. Zakai Ziegler barely played with foul trouble. They thought that they did not play their best game and were lucky to win that game in Champaign. And I think a lot of people would love to see that rematch.
Two quick ones for you, Isaac. What stood out to you about what the committee did here?
I think wins above bubble was something that really mattered more than I thought. Now, that's a new metric that's been introduced to the team sheets this year, which basically is basically averaging like what a normal bubble team would do against a schedule. I think that's why North Carolina got in, because their losses, yes, they had a lot of losses in the quad one section, but they were to really awesome teams. It's like on the road at Kansas, Alabama, like Michigan State on a neutral, like they put Auburn, like they played really good teams. And wins above bubble basically goes like, what would an average bubble team do in those games? They would lose. And so Carolina got boosted up by that metric a little bit because they were 21-1 in games outside the first quadrant, and those games also matter as well. So I think it showed the committee's going to go into that a little bit. I wasn't impressed with the bracket overall, though. I thought, I think West Virginia absolutely should have been in. And then there's some tough draws that they did, and there's some big storylines too, like Rick Pitino, Bill Self, and I'm blanking on one. Bill Self and John Calipari are all in the same little quadrant together. That's big time. And then, yeah, if I'm Michigan, I would be furious at my draw. If I'm Louisville, I'd be furious at my draw getting an 8 seed, like stuff like that. So there's gonna be ramifications galore, I think, for this bracket, because it's very strong. There were very few bid stealers this year. So all of the mid majors that made it are awesome teams.
Yeah, no storylines for Illinois with no Oklahoma and no West Virginia in this as well. Who do you like, Isaac? Who do you got? Who you got in the Final Four here?
I went a little bit chalk. I went with Auburn, and then I went with Duke, and then I went with Houston, and then I went with Texas Tech. So I have 3 number 1 seeds, and Texas Tech was the number 3 seed. And then I had Duke over Auburn in the final. Duke, I think, has the closest thing to the UConn recipe that I've seen. They protect the rim at a high level. They take a ton of shots at the rim, and they create a ton of catch and shoot threes. And that is exactly what UConn did last year to win the title. So I'm kind of banking on that recipe repeating itself a little bit.
Isaac Trotter, the goods. Can't thank you enough, man, for joining us. And I'll see you up in Milwaukee. All right.
Sounds good. Can't wait.
All right. Great stuff from Isaac Trotter. Read his stuff at cbssports.com. So proud of what he has done. It's been awesome to see. You can go check his stuff out there, as well as 247sports.com. All right. We're going to catch up with our guy, Michael Carpenter. But first, let's hear from one of our great sponsors. Are you ready to optimize your nutrition this year? Well, Factor has chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy. They're dietitian approved and ready to heat and eat in 2 minutes so you can fuel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you. Factor arrives fresh and fully prepared, perfect for any active, busy lifestyle. And with over 40 options across 8 dietary preferences on the menu each week, it's easy to pick meals tailored to your goals. So you can choose from preferences like Calorie Smart, Keto, or my favorite, Protein Plus. And Factor also can help you feel your best all day long with wholesome smoothies, breakfast, grab-and-go snacks, and more add-ons. Reach your goals this year with ingredients you can trust and convenience that can't be beat. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FACTORPODCAST to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code FACTORPODCAST at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. All right, let's continue this thing, and let's bring in our guy, Michael Carpenter from the 200 Level Podcast. Carp, how are you, buddy?
Good, man. Live from my buddy's garage in Austin right now. So we spent kind of the day out and about. It was a beautiful 81-degree day down here, and watched the selection show on his phone. And there have been very few times in my life where the brackets have been unveiled for Illinois, and I said, Sweet 16 or bust. And today was one such day because it seems rare to have a bracket unfold where there are a few narratives, few storylines, no ghost from years past in the way. This seemed to be one that just kind of, I don't know, like divine intervention or something. I mean, it looks on paper like a really good draw.
you can't say you were screwed. Like you can't say,
No.
oh, typical Illini bias here. Like they screwed the Illini. So yeah, I mean, you feel pretty good about the draw. I just feel like this is kind of what they earned, right? Like at the end of the day, Carp, we'll talk about the roller coaster that was the season. Yeah, let's get into it. I mean, you ride the roller coaster. This has been a roller coaster of a season for Illinois, where the first 15 games, they looked like a team that could make an Elite Eight run, a Final Four run. Then they looked like a team that was going to be a bubble team. Mm-hmm. And then they end the season pretty well. And then you have a obviously terrible loss to a Maryland team who's just got your number. So what's it been like for you, the rider of the roller coaster with this season?
The month of February in particular, I would say like week 2 or 3 of January, probably beginning with the USC game at home, which seemed like a one-off, but then it became apparent that it wasn't a one-off and that this team probably for about 5 or 6 weeks was not particularly good. I mean, if we're being honest, I know that the numbers you guys dredged up, I think Derek did about, like a bottom 250 defense for like a 5-week span. And that's why, just think about this. It was just 3 weeks ago when they played Iowa. And it was essentially, if you lose this game, then it's DEFCON 1. Mm-hmm. And you are thinking about bubble. And you are thinking about, is this team going to win another game? Well, they won that. They handily beat a Michigan team that all of a sudden they've refound their mojo in one weekend in Indianapolis. And then the Purdue win, which I think at the time and still stands as a quality win. So, I mean, I do ride the roller coaster. I will say that with this team, the frustration, while acknowledging all the external factors and injuries and illness played a role, the frustration I think stemmed from the fact that the numbers that Joey dredged up about like margin of defeat. It's the Jekyll and Hyde nature of this team that made it very difficult to get any sense of consistency as a fan, like as far as what expectations I should have for it. So the Maryland game was the latest in a run of double-digit losses to Power 4 teams. And yet, despite all of that, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, this is essentially the 6th straight tournament that you made under Brad Underwood. And this is, of all the draws that they've had, maybe the most favorable to make the second weekend apart from last year. So it's, I don't know, Jeremy. I mean, it's been whiplash, honestly.
Yeah. And I get the frustration with this team. I mean,
yeah,
you watch it, you just never know what to expect out of this team. But let's zoom out for a second, Carp, and as we like to say on the radio, let's get a little macro. This is, I mean, it would have been 6 straight years in the NCAA tournament for the pandemic. And what Brad Underwood has done, where you're to the point of like getting nitty gritty about is this a successful season if they don't get to a Sweet 16?
Yeah.
Just what do you make of this run? That like in one of the more frustrating years of the last 6 years, like you're a 6 seed.
Yeah. I mean, if that's your floor, you're in a good place. I mean, my friend was asking me at dinner about that, and I gave all the reasoning behind it. I mean, I might have individual criticisms that I would levy towards Brad Underwood, and there are things this offseason that I want to be addressed. But there's no denying. I mean, we were on the radio during the late Weber and then the Gross years, and just being in the bubble conversation was a solid to good year for that, 7-8 year stretch. So I don't take these for granted. I mean, the fact that I woke up this morning and had no doubts that Illinois would be in it, and then I could actually sit back, relax, and enjoy the selection show and just, kind of be curious as to what draw they got. I mean, that speaks, I think, volumes of what Brad Underwood's done as a program, as the head of a program. And I think he's really, really strong at that. So, I mean, there were times earlier this year, I mean, during the 3-game losing streak in particular to Michigan State, Wisconsin, and Duke, where I did have some concerns about long-term, does this approach that he's taking, does it really bode well? And you guys had a conversation after Maryland, you and Joey, about, the 2-year plan with these players, and do you mix portal? Do you mix developmental guys? How do you do that? I will say this about Brad Underwood. He has adapted year in, year out to whatever happened the year before. He adjusts. This year might have been overcorrection, and he might have miscalculated some things. But when you make it essentially 6 years in a row, that means you're doing more things right than not.
Yeah, and the difference between last year and this year's, this year he went out and got better players than he did a year ago. But Marcus Damask was better than they ever imagined, right? Sure. And you had Terrence Shannon and Coleman Hawkins, who just had such a high floor. Not to get ahead, I want to talk about this weekend, but I do think it's important that you get something from this year, even if you don't get to a Sweet 16. And I do think say you win a game this weekend and then you bring back Trey White and Kylan Boswell and Tomislav Vicic and Merez Johnson. I would even say Ben Humrickhouse. That is a very veteran group. That is a group that is a really good core, and you feel like they can learn from the experience, not only together, but just of everything they've gone through, the teams they played, and playing in the NCAA tournament. Like, that is one of my biggest concerns this weekend is you have 9 games of NCAA tournament experience of guys who've actually played on the court and will play on the court, this weekend. So I think that's important. Is retention is going to be very important this week, but I want to talk about Kasparis here in a little bit, but you still got to go get the Kasparises and Will Rileys, because you need that talent to, people saw it with Terrence Shannon. He just happened to be 24, but you need that level of talent to go far in this tournament.
Yeah, you do. And, Kasparis, it's been a rough month for him. And yet, I looked at the box score after the Maryland game and it felt like he wasn't doing hardly anything right. And then you saw that he was still the leading scorer. He almost had a triple-double.
He was the best player on the court for them the other night.
Yeah, so that's the confounding thing, but it's really not that confounding when you consider his age. So that is where the kind of
can I bring this up? I want to get into this with you.
Mm-hmm.
Kasparis Yakashonis is such an interesting player because I think everyone knows he's really, really good. He was your best player for the first 3 months of the season, right? Him and Tomislav Vicic. But among any Illini star player, I feel like his approval rating is the lowest, Carp.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
More than Meyer 2 years ago?
I think so.
I couldn't stand Matthew Meyer, but that was that's neither here nor there.
Sure,
but I guess
sophomore year was rough, but
yeah. Here's what I think it is.
Yeah, knowing Matthew Meyer and knowing what the locker room felt about him, they liked him way more than the fans did. But yes, I would agree. Meyer's probably in that conversation.
Yeah, and really that year it was probably much more to do with the Sky Clarks and the Jaden Epps of the world. And I think a lot of what was really going on there, if it didn't come out immediately, it kind of came out in bits and pieces after that. It was the freshmen, actually, not so much Matthew Meyer. But that's a good point. With me and Kasparis, I love watching him play because anything could happen. But unfortunately, it's all too often the last month been the negative outcome from these amazing plays that he tries to make. So it's clear that he is an NBA skilled kind of player. As far as the Q rating and how it's fallen for him, it would be difficult for me to think of a comp of an Illini player that started so high, which he did. I was at the bragging rights game. The dude was a killer in that. He was ultimately at the game.
Arkansas game was unbelievable for him.
And even last week against Purdue, it was a rough game. And then he makes that 3, and it's like, well, that's that dude, because he essentially is. So I don't have a good comp for that. I think that the frustrations that might be directed towards Kasparis, if there is maybe a kind of a subconscious thing there, I think it's the fact that, we maybe as fans feel a bit bamboozled almost because, when we talk about the way I was excited and I know other fans were coming into this season because of the offseason that Brad Underwood had, getting this international talent, guys that were being on NBA draft boards. I know Kasparis might not have been initially, but pretty quickly. I think that what happens is if you see them be flawed and see them not be this Terrence Shannon Jr. redux, that you start to think, well, why did I allow myself to get so excited? So I really think, I'm playing armchair psychiatrist.
Can I get into this? I think this is what is behind all of it.
Okay.
Terrence Shannon was a better college player
100%.
than Kasparis Yakashonis. And he could go on to have a better NBA career. But he gets drafted 27th.
You think it's draft positioning?
I think it's because Illinois fans don't know what a one and done looks like because they've never had it. They haven't had one and any.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've gone through and looked at, and I'm going to write about this tomorrow. One and dones, most of them aren't Cooper Flagg and Cade Cunningham and Brandon Miller.
Yeah.
That's why those guys go 1, 2, and 3. Kasparis is not going 1, 2, or 3. There's a point in the season I'm like, could he play his way into that because he was playing?
Yeah.
But he's got flaws. But that doesn't mean the NBA is not going to take him in the lottery or in the top 10 because Reed Shepherd was bad at the end of the year. He went number 3 in the draft. There's Tyler Hero could barely shoot at the end of his Kentucky season. And Anthony Edwards had terrible last few games of college. So they have flaws. And a lot of these guys that do get picked late lottery or mid lottery, like they have flaws, but that's why they're not drafted 1, 2, or 3. So I think just because we hadn't seen it, but Kentucky fans have seen this. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, Devin Booker might not be the stud as a true freshman, but in 5 years, he might be a star. Like, I think that's a big part of it is you expect a one and done when you finally get one to just be this consistent guy.
Yeah.
Well, like Will Riley wasn't, November through January were pretty rough for him. And now he's emerged as what looks like a one and done, but it feels like he gets a little bit more grace than Kasparas for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And there's a recency bias with that too, because Will's been really good the last probably month and a half, or really, if you think about it, from the game at Michigan State where he went off. That was mid-January. So we're basically talking 2 months of really good basketball from him. And that was right about where Kasparas, there was the foul trouble in that game and then the arm injury after that. And, or maybe that was right before that. But regardless, he never seemed to, Kasparas, fully catch that kind of mojo that he had going in the first 2 months of the season. So I think it's a mix of things. I think the draft positioning, it inflates the expectations we have for him. I think that his early performances inflated the expectations we had for the rest of the year. I mean, he was doing things in November and December that he's still doing periodically now. It's just the timing of those amazing shots or amazing plays tended to fall late game situations where you'd say, oh yeah, this is that dude. What is tantalizing about him is he could certainly pull that off again this weekend and lead you along with the other guys to a Sweet 16 matchup. And in the two first games that you would play, including Kentucky with all the talent they have, Kasparas is probably still going to be, I mean, obviously, the highest drafted guy on the court.
Trey Johnson from Texas would probably get picked ahead of him, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you end up facing them, that's true. But I mean,
he has been more negative than positive. He has been more negative than positive here recently, but that's why I hope like he can leave a lasting good impression this weekend, Carp, because he's been one of the best freshman seasons we've seen. Like in the totality of it, you got Kawan, Deion Thomas, like top 4 in points. He's
DJ Richardson had a good freshman year. Well, I wonder what. Yeah. I know. But what would be funny actually is to see, because DJ was freshman of the year, was he not?
I think he was, and that wasn't this year's class.
No, it definitely was not. It would just be intriguing, and this is just some like random research I'll do tonight just to kind of compare the numbers. But no, I mean with KJ, here's the thing. Like I try to tell myself
that's saying more like Illinois fans have never experienced such an overhyped player. He leads you in points and assists, and he's third in rebounds. Like it's.
But you know what it is, Jeremy? I think the other thing to it too is in defensive frustrations that Illini fans get, because I mean even Friday night I just got tired of watching it, because essentially it was like Curbelo redux in so many ways. And let me throw that one. Let me throw that wrinkle in there too. I think because we're coming 2 years off the heels of Andre Curbelo, and I remember his freshman year, and I remember that late February, early March run where I thought, this is my guy. Like this is the dude, from Puerto Rico, from New York. He was a guy that was like an and one mixtape on the court. And he was starting to really kind of harness all of that in such a positive way. And then sophomore year happened. He got concussed. And I think for Illini fans, there's this weird similarity between post-injury KJ, which is, of course, not a concussion, and what was happening with Curbelo for much of his sophomore year, where you saw how good it was and how he somehow stopped making so many silly things, as creative of a player as he was. And now KJ is doing so many silly things that, yeah, it can be frustrating, as good as he is.
For sure. All right, Carp, before I let you go, it's amazing how this week will determine how you feel about this season.
Always does.
Right? Like lose the first game, you hated this team. Win one game, it's like, all right. Sweet 16, you love this team and always did.
100%. That's it. I tweeted that this morning. I mean, it's just the truth, where I think that, listen, Illinois is not alone in that. I mean, there are probably the 68 teams in the tournament. If you look at most Power 4 level teams, they are thinking the same thing, that if they don't make it to the second weekend, then whatever. I think there is some historical context we need to make sure that we think about here, where in my life, I think I can still count on one hand the second weekend trips. And that might be right. 89, 2001, 2002, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 6. So just over one hand. And I mean, that speaks to the fact that while this program has been good, that second weekend has never been a given. I think that there's a little bit of added urgency because of everything that happened in the middle of that Big Ten season, especially And because of, I don't know if you really just kind of done the message board sweep or the Twitter sweep, even after Maryland, I've been critical of Brad Underwood quite often in the last month. And yet fans after the Maryland game, which I just kind of chalked it up to that matchup sucked and that was frustrating, they are really ticked off with him in a way that they haven't been, certainly in 2 years, right? More questions for a guy that's had a lot of success. And I understand parts of that, but I try to be as level as I can in those criticisms. So I think that, while most teams would say second weekend, it's certainly success, I think there's an added bit of, Brad, you got good matchups here. You need to make hay with it. And in a weird way, let's say they don't make it out this weekend, or they lose a first round matchup to Texas or Xavier, or let's say they make it to the second game against Kentucky, which has their own injury issues to deal with, major issues, and you lose to them in somewhat lackluster fashion. I don't want to enter an offseason with all of those questions that would be conjured up by a result like that. So I'm of course rooting for the team to have success because I root for Illinois. I'm also rooting for them to have success because I don't want there to be extra narratives going into an offseason, because it felt like that 3-game winning streak, the 4-game winning streak before Maryland, we were getting rid of that. Yeah, I don't want that dredged up again.
The other two factors I would say is, one, you'd like to make the most of Will Riley and Gasper Sakashonis being on your team to first 2 rounds you'll ever have. But also, if Brad Underwood got to 2 second weekends in a row, I think you get that like monkey permanently off his back. Eventually you want to get to a Final Four, but I know there was a little moment you thought Final Four for this team, but it's so young. It was such a new team. Usually it's year 2 with a team like that you get there. So I think those are the two other factors there.
If they make the Sweet 16, this season is an unqualified success, despite everything. And I think that's totally fair for a younger team, a team that did have some external issues plaguing them, like injuries and illness. That was a factor. And you guys talked about it. I think the question was, to what extent was that a factor? And to what extent could the coaching staff have maybe done this, that, or the other to not let the valleys get so low? And I think that's a fair criticism for this team, that the valleys, despite the youth, injuries, and illness, did they have to be that bad when they got that bad? But regardless, it's a clean slate. They have a full week off. Literally from Friday night in Indy to Friday night in Milwaukee, presumably a very pro-Illini crowd from Chicago. And this is theirs for the taking. I really do feel that way, especially with Kentucky. And I didn't even realize the extent is that Lamont Butler is out. Yeah. That's huge. This is a 3 seed based on the resume, and they deserve that 3 seed. But you got the most vulnerable 3 seed, from what I can tell, looking at the brackets. So matchups look good. This team has a week off. And I know some would say, well, Will and KJ are already looking towards the NBA. I actually think there's something maybe kind of freeing about the fact that I wouldn't be surprised if this team actually comes out this weekend a little bit loose in a good way. Because
we know what a good tournament run can do for someone's draft stock here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Those guys want to win, and they want to go far here.
Yeah, and I think for KJ, it's not so much a question, is he going to be a lottery pick, but is he going to be 5, 6, 7? Or is he going to be 10, 11, 12? And I don't know what the salary differential is there, but Will Riley is someone that, gets talked about as a first-round pick. I think that's pretty much set in stone. But could he play himself into a certifiable lottery pick? So, there are things to play for beyond just making the second weekend. There's things to play for their professional stock. And I really do think, too, the story despite Will and KJ, is Brad Underwood. It's not trying to heap too much onto that Loyola loss. The Elite Eight trip, I think, did a lot to dispel concerns that we might have had from that. However, some of the big losses in terms of margin this year, I think, raise concerns, some valid, about the coaching aspect of it, which I know it's like, listen, he's a winner. He wins a lot of games. He's a good coach. But the in-game strategy, things like that, or the lack of the ability to quickly adjust, where if you get out of this weekend, because I think matchup-wise, there are plenty of reasons for you to do that, it will just ease some of those fears. I get it. I'm trying to be as level as I can with it, and I think that I just don't want to see what it would be like if they don't make the second weekend, and knowing what Twitter, the message boards, and all that would probably sound off after a disappointing weekend.
Michael Carpenter, the 200 Level Podcast. Go check it out. Enjoy, Austin. Appreciate you jumping on, buddy.
All right. Yeah. Appreciate it, Jeremy. Take care.
Good stuff with Michael Carpenter. All right, let's bring in our guy, Joey Wagner, who's just at the Illini women's basketball party as they get back into the NCAA tournament for a second time in 3 years. But before we get into that, Joey, what did you think of Illinois basketball draw, men's basketball?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked into it like you guys have. I went straight from that to the watch party. But at first glance, I thought, okay, Kentucky, as Carp just laid out, is kind of the 3 seed that you would feel less terrible about, maybe in theory, just depending on how those injuries shake out. If you can get there, then you get a Xavier or a Texas team before that is coming off of a game that you feel like Illinois should have a chance at. So I looked at that, and I think I messaged the group. I said, that feels like the Sweet 16 path, just like the most initial first glances for that. But for as many times, like you can go back to Loyola was Ken Palm this, or you see Houston was Ken Palm that, and all that's true. This feels like it's Illinois got a favorable one on paper going into this. You're close to home. Things line up pretty well for Illinois if they can find a weekend of consistency in Milwaukee.
That's the big question, right? With this team is can they put two games together like that? All right, Joey, I think it was at Memorial Stadium, right? Set the scene of Illinois women's basketball getting back to the tournament for a second time in 3 years under Shauna Green, which is just an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, there were probably about 150 people in the Club 77, I think is what it is, the 6th floor of Memorial Stadium. The team was there, big watch party. They're an 8 seed, which is pretty much everything we thought Illinois women were going to be. An 8 seed. They will play Creighton in Austin on Saturday. I haven't seen a time yet for that, Jeremy. But it was a celebration, definitely, of navigating a season that has been just, for as much as I know Carp, I just caught in the tail end of him. And as much as we talk about the injuries and the illnesses for the men's team, the women's were kind of like the OGs here, right? On the injuries and illnesses with Gretchen Dolan and Makaira Cook and Letty Vasconcelos. And then Corey Allen had a big knee brace today. Shea Bolin hasn't played. So they have just pieced this thing together to win those 8 straight, which set them tournament bound, really, before that 4-game losing streak to end the regular season and into the Big Ten tournament. But it was a celebration because this program, for as much as these 3 years have been really significant, they haven't been this is still not uncharted waters, but there's not been a lot of travel on these waters for the Illinois women's basketball program for a while. And as Kendall Bostic, as Shauna Green said, they are firmly in. They're not in the first 4, which still counts, but you have a legit 8-9 game with a chance to play Texas on Monday. That it's another step for this program, right? The first 4, and Shauna said, that year we were kind of, whoa, we made this thing? No one expected that first year to make that. And now it's another step. They're firmly in. They have a chance to go win their first tournament game since 2000 and see what they can do against top-seeded Texas.
All right, I'm looking at the first round game because this is the one, right? Because for Illinois women, they haven't won an NCAA tournament game in 25 years. So to get a win for this senior class, to be able to do that, Genesis Bryant, Kendall Bostic, Adalia McKenzie, Bryn Shoup-Hill, these girls who have changed the program would be massive. And Bart Torvik, for what it's worth, has Illinois as a 3-point favorite in this one, Joey. So what do you think of this matchup as if you looked into it? Because obviously number 1 seed Texas in Austin would be very difficult.
Yeah, Creighton, it's a matchup. Richmond was another conversation, and they're very similar. Creighton's going to shoot the heck out of it. They are very much 0-5 against quad 1 teams and undefeated against everyone else. 6 quad 2 wins, and then you tack on quad 3 and 4. So they beat exactly who they were supposed to beat. They finished 2nd in the Big East. It's a good Creighton team. And
I'm looking at Joey. They've lost to UConn 3 times, UCLA once.
Yeah, and they beat Nebraska. There's a win over Nebraska. So there's not a bad loss, and I think that's a good win over Nebraska for them. So Shauna Green knows. She said, I haven't looked too much into them yet. That was, I would assume now she certainly has. She said, I know how Creighton plays. All 5 players are going to shoot. They have 3 players who shoot, I think, at least 37% from 3 by at least 53s this season. So it's not like this is just, a team that takes a couple and makes a couple. They will shoot the heck out of it. They don't have really the size. So if you're thinking of post matchups, that would seem to be good for Illinois, but that means Kendall Bostic, that means Brent Shue-Pill, Barry Wallace are going to have to be out on the perimeter and guarding some of those stretch bigs, and we'll see how that goes. I think ideally you would have preferred a mid-major team. Like, you would have been okay seeing Richmond, but you got to go in, you got to beat a high-major team from the Big East and try your hand at Texas. But to your point, to get that first one in 25 years, that talk about steps. Like, this program is rebuilt so fast that you kind of lose sight of necessary steps in a rebuild. Getting there 2 years ago, as fluky as it may have been, you go and win the WBIT. They wanted that to catapult them into where they are now. It has. So now you want to go get that first one in 25 years and just see what you can do against Texas. Tougher than heck. Probably, I mean, no one's going to pick them. Why would you? Let's see what you can do. Try your hand at it and see if you can muster something up.
They had 4 straight losses going into this. 2 of them were competitive to USC and UCLA, who are great teams. But it felt like they ran out of gas in their last 2 games, had a lead and, just faded in that fourth quarter. Jen Bryant looked exhausted by the end of this. So while you and I think maybe they should move up the women's tournament to give them a little bit more of the shine, I know the women's tournament has done really, really well here, but I just hate that they kind of start at the same time as the men. I wish it was staggered a little bit so they each got their showcase. But for the women, like, this long waits between games could be helpful, right? Just to rest them up a little bit.
Yeah, they need that 16 days is what the ultimate stretch is going to be between games. Shauna Green said, they've had some sicknesses and people are banged up. That's Corey Allen. Couldn't have missed the knee brace today on her right knee. I wouldn't expect to see her in Austin. So it's a 6-player rotation unless you throw Haven Smith out there. So when you're talking that, like, you do need these extra days, minutes, hours, however much time you can get to rest these guys and get them in the chambers. They've got everything at up, and to try to rest them. Shauna Green said it's been a little bit of a balancing act in practice in terms of you want to keep their cardio, you want to keep going, but they've gotten back to the fundamentals. They've had a couple scrimmages. For the most part, it's clean up some of those late game issues that have plagued them in the final 2 games that they've played, and just get some stinking rest. I mean, they don't have a lot. I mean, you need to get every last mile out of this senior group that you can get down in Austin and see what happens for them. But yeah, rest has been absolutely critical for them going into this. And she mentioned, last year, Shauna had to kind of really get a fire going again. They knew they weren't in the NCAA tournament. They knew they had faltered down the stretch. They had fallen short of the expectations they had for themselves. So she really ramped up the competitiveness a year ago to just get that into the WBIT, and it worked out, right? They go on and they win the thing. This year is not that. You don't need to recreate that. You need to give them time to get their legs back under them, recover, and you got a flight to Austin and go into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I know these guys weren't seniors, but this kind of reminds me of, maybe it's not the perfect comp, but it'd be really cool if that senior group got to get a win in the NCAA tournament, kind of like Bryant McIntosh, Vic Law at Northwestern, like what that meant for that program. Now, that was their first NCAA tournament appearance in program history.
Nathan Taphorn, don't leave out peeking out of this.
That's right. You know that one. So that would be, he was a senior on that one, right? So, like,
he had the pass.
I just think of that. Like, that would be awesome if they could get that, and that's the way they end their career, is leaving with an NCAA tournament win, having a chance at number 1 Texas. Like, that'd just be a lasting just stamp for what they've done to this program, which I don't think we can talk enough about.
No, and they don't need that for that to really be looked at, but it sure as heck would feel good for them to know that they got an NCAA tournament win and gave themselves a chance, however far off chance that is. Texas is a machine. The number 1s in the women's side are incredible. They're really, really good. And we're talking about this, and UConn's not a number 1. I mean, goodness, like that's the top 6, 7, 8 in women's college basketball are powerhouses. But to go in and win down in Austin, beat Creighton, have that under their belt, that would be really meaningful for a senior group that has done a lot. And really, they put themselves in a position where it's not far-fetched to beat Creighton. It's an incredibly difficult game. But you can go in there and have that moment to – think about 2 years ago, they're in Notre Dame, Mississippi State. Kendall Bostic on basically one leg. I mean, she couldn't move hardly at all. She's healthy now. Brent Shoup-Hill had a broken nose. Like, they were just absolutely beat to crap going in there. So now you're healthy and really can kind of, well, as healthy as they're going to be at this moment in time, and put your best foot forward and see if you can avenge a little bit of that from 2 years ago and take that next step.
Just to wrap up here, Joey, I saw this earlier today. Only 7 schools have both basketball teams in the NCAA tournament and won a bowl game. Texas, UConn, Michigan, Iowa State, Louisville, Ole Miss, and Illinois. And then Illinois tweeted out, one of 9 schools in the nation are in a bowl berth, qualify for the NCAA tournament, women's basketball, men's basketball, and women's volleyball. So another pretty good year for Josh Whitman's athletic department.
Yeah, Josh Whitman, I would imagine, is going to get his air miles coming back and forth. Tried to half navigate or ride on the Whitman jet if I could. But yeah, it's a good time to be him. And I talked to him about this at Notre Dame 2 years ago. Remember, that was a Raleigh Quest Bowl year for football, and men were in, where did I drive? Des Moines that season. And he got emotional talking about it, because think back to when he took over, and it's an awful long way from where it was when he took over with those 3 programs. All 3 of them were not near what they are right now. And obviously, I think football's in a much better place now than it was then. And same with women's basketball. When you look at the recruiting class coming in, Brad Underwood continues to do his thing. It's a good time to be Josh Whitman.
At some point, we got to do a spring ball podcast. We're just too busy with hoops here now.
Yeah, I don't even. There's no spring ball this week. I think it's spring break for them, so we have a chance to
preview.
Yeah, we should probably talk about that at some point. There's a lot going on. This is what happens when programs are good. Like, I feel like we have to do a preview, but we never stop talking football because Brett Bielema had an A+ offseason, and then we just work that in around basketball coverage.
Joey Wagner, you're the goods, man. Appreciate you.
Thanks, man.
All right. Good stuff from Joey Wagner. Appreciate Isaac Trotter and Michael Carpenter for their time as well. Almost 500 people on this live YouTube. So we really appreciate you guys. Hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notifications bell. And if you're not a VIP member right now, there's no better time to do it. With us, me and Derek are going to be in Milwaukee. Joey's going to be in Austin, Texas with the women. And then, of course, we got the transfer portal opening up next week. So we'll have a lot of coverage there. Just $1 for your first month at IlliniInquirer.com. So go check that out. But appreciate you guys listening to the Illini Inquirer podcast. Give us a follow, rating, review, wherever you get your podcast. And everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. And we'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer podcast.